Hello, my name is Ana Marisa, and this is a reflection on my week-long self-observation. I have always liked academics. I may not have always enjoyed school, but I do love to learn. I built myself a world of reference information and trivia. I would study any subject I could get my hands on. I was precocious and arrogant enough to tell teachers that they didn't go in depth, that they skipped the most interesting part, that they bored me. It didn't really matter if it were physical sciences or social sciences, math or literature. I wanted to know as much about the world, our history, and the people in it as possible. I want to know why things are as they are, how we got here, and where we are going. That is why, despite my long history of bringing watercolors to school, of sewing during class, of writing when I should be sleeping, I am studying geographic information sciences. I love physical geography, but now I'm shifting my focus towards cultural geography. I want my future career to focus on telling the human story from where it happened and drawing maps to help others understand why it did. Cartographers need to have many skills, among which is the fluency in several programs that help us render the physical world into a digital one. Programs like ArcGIS or even Photoshop. I chose to better my AutoCAD fluency in this project for 3 reasons. First, it is the program I knew the least about. Second, given the chance to do a simple school project versus an overly complicated school project, I ended up giving myself more work 95% of the time. Using AutoCAD sounded more fun than typing practice. Third, AutoCAD is used so widely in the field of GIS that my uncle, who is an engineer and works closely with cartographers, was frantically texting me to make sure I had plans to take an AutoCAD course before I left university. It seems like this was as good a time as any to better acquaint myself with the program. I assigned myself 5 projects each based on the previous day's results. On day 1, I made a vase that sits on my desk because of a very simple shape and the small artistic flourishes. Day 2, I wanted to try incorporating more curves, so I sketched a water bottle. For day 3, I tried to make a 3-dimensional object, so I designed a tissue box and drew a 3D view. Then I decided I didn't want to go the 3D route, so on day 4, I designed a home's floor plan with the intent on familiarizing myself with the sort of thing AutoCAD is actually meant to do. Finally, on day 5, I drew a facade of the house that matched the floor plan with mixed results. I learned some interesting things from this project. In regard to the software myself, I was able to determine when I would rather use typing functions versus point-and-click menu options when selecting tools, and which tools are far more complicated than necessary. Why the arc tool needs so many options for creating an incomplete circle, I may never know. Part of the project is just getting used to where things are and my specific preferences. In that respect, I surprised myself by preferring to draw a square 1 line at a time rather than using the rectangle tool. I also learned that AutoCAD is just a dark mode version of the most mathematically involved art program I could imagine. It is intimidating to look at. In fact, that I think scared me into using simple pieces for this project. I stuck with rigid geometric figures that were easy to calculate and relatively quick to draw. I was once an intern at a printing company where I prepared artwork for customer orders, like Redfish with all their scales for a fisherman supply company, and I have never once flinched when asked to draw flowers or landscapes. I think I set the bar way too low on projects, and now I am only happy with the results of day 2 and to some extent day 4. As I mentioned earlier, I like taking on challenging work even if all that is required of me is the bare minimum. When I make something I'm proud of, I look at it for days. I will re-watch, reread, or just stare at whatever media I brought into the world. I have not spared a single glance to the final projects of this week's observation. This is not the quality of work I'm used to producing. I decided to do one final project to redeem myself, and you have been watching my progress. I have a dress I have owned since elementary school that I refuse to give up because I liked the daisies. I also like the pattern of the dress, which in this context is the physical shape that makes the final form. So I sat down with my seam ripper for a few hours and took out every stitch in the garment. After ironing it flat, I measured its dimensions and took notes on how it was constructed. The dress is simple and very cheaply made. The fabric is 100% polyester and the seams are stitched twice, once to close and a second time to keep the exposed raw edge from fraying. This sort of thing proves just how mass-produced it was, and luckily for me, mass-produced clothes are very easy to put together because someone else already figured out how to do it with the least amount of materials and time possible. Using my notes, I drew it up in AutoCAD. Printing it out was the hardest part of that experience, so at the very least, my week of observations gave me some well-needed practice. My original plan was to make a dress for myself, but I would be unable to print out the pattern in my size using the printer at my house, and I didn't think it was worth going to the print shop that is probably closed. It's like changing plans, but I can adapt. I resized the drawing to fit on an A4 size paper and printed it out. I have plenty of cute fabrics for this project, but I chose to use some cabbage that I just can't seem to get rid of. The pattern was cut and pinned to my scrap, and I began to assemble the dress. I started with the skirt and then stitched the shoulders in place. Off camera, I hemmed the edges of the sleeves and attached the bodice of the dress. Then I added ribbon to the neckline since I didn't want to make a tiny tape that came with the actual dress. One of the most frustrating things about sewing is when you have spent hours on a piece that you have no use for it afterwards. Luckily, I noticed that the size of the dress pattern I made is about the size of doll clothes that I used to have. I went looking through old boxes until I found one that potentially fit. It's a little big, but I think it works. I'm much happier with the final version of this AutoCAD endeavor than my last group of designs. I was able to implement curves and actually make something out of the plans I set. This just felt like a completed work. I appreciate good architecture as much as the next guy, but there's something about starting with one thing and ending with something you love even more, and that's just not something I can do while drawing houses. I'm a bit sad that I couldn't make a new dress for myself, but I do still have the patterns, and having a pattern just means that it'll be a project for another day.